Welcome to our live discussion today on the topic of redefining success after unexpected change. And speaking of unexpected change, Greta and I were due to go live on LinkedIn about 15 moments ago, but LinkedIn Live did not want to play ball with us. And so in real time, we improvised and pivoted, and we are now recording on Zoom.
Yeah.
The conversation will be exactly the same, but we just won't be live on LinkedIn as promised. We'll be live on Zoom.
Awesome.
Thank you, Greta. So currently, a lot of people are dealing with career change that they didn't plan for, whether it's from restructures, layoffs, leadership decisions, or simply realizing the definition of success no longer works for them. Today, we wanted to open up a conversation about what these moments really feel like and some ways to be able to navigate through them. But first, some introductions. My name is Claire Campion. I'm a career transition coach, formerly a HR executive at Google and Grammarly. Greta.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Greta Petruska. Right now, I'm a leadership coach and CEO at HTP Consulting. Prior to that, I worked for McKinsey 13 years and two tech startups. And I just recently, 2 years ago, I moved to US, but it feels like it happened just now. So that's about me.
To Europeans living in the US, Greta.
Exactly.
So, why is this topic important today? Firstly, for me, I would say, at the moment, hardly a day goes by when I don't read on the news about another round of layoffs. These days used to be rare and a sign that potentially a company wasn't doing well in the past. But now we're seeing this more and more often, and the message is quite the opposite. Share prices are often rising, actually, in fact, when layoffs are announced. Personally, the part that stands out to me are, the way the layoffs are conducted and the perceived lack of empathy in how they're handled and how they're now being seen almost as a transactional process. And even if somebody has been there, 10 or 20 years and we're a top performer. Greta, can you share a bit more about why this topic is important to you?
Yeah, it's just same to you, like reading the news and also like adjusting to the US processes. It's quite brutal to see like how these layoffs are happening. And I also went through quite a bit of change in the past 6 years, I would say, and some of them were by choice, and some of them not so much. So this topic is on top of mind because, as I mentioned, I moved to the US 2 years ago, and I'm still adjusting, and it's quite a bit of an adjustment. So everybody who is navigating change is I just emphasize with those people, and yeah, I'm one of those as well.
Thank you, Greta. So I would say, from what I've seen and also actually personally experienced once myself earlier in my career with job losses and unexpected change, is that in the first instance, it is very tough. And especially in the beginning, when you
Yeah.
get mostly that shock news that you're being laid off or there's a team restructuring or something, very fundamental is changing in your work. And oftentimes I think we feel a mix of feelings. It can be anything from grief to loss. And often sometimes we feel embarrassed or ashamed. We often may think, I thought it would never happen to me. We always doubt ourselves and wonder, is it a reflection of my work?
Yeah.
And it does take time to work through these feelings and to process them. And there often can be, added financial pressure too if you are the main breadwinner
Yeah.
in your household. I would also say the pace at which many of us are living our lives today is just fast paced. We live in a very dynamic, fast moving world. And many of us can default into that lifestyle of living our life on autopilot and moving fast. And then a very surprise restructure or, a severe episode of burnout comes along and really forces us to pause and to take stock of things. In my coaching work, I often hear people saying, it's the first time in years that I'm actually thinking, what do I actually want to do now with my
Yeah.
career? because maybe earlier in their career they stumbled into their career, or they were encouraged to go a certain path that maybe their parents encouraged them, or for financial reasons they were told go down this path. Greta, I know identity is a topic close to your
Yeah.
heart. How do you think identity after a excuse me, how do you think people think about identity after a job loss, for example?
Yeah, so this is something which can hit really hard. And so, for example, when I left my job at McKinsey, it was my decision, and I knew that the next step is maybe somewhere else. But what I didn't realize is that for so long it was just like a huge part of my identity. So work was extremely important for me, and when I made this decision, what I did was not prepared for is the morning after, when nobody calls, and actually, okay, I was questioning myself, what is the impact I'm creating? So my identity was really around my job and work at McKinsey. So it took quite a bit of time to understand, like, how to go back to my fundamentals, how to go back to my values, how to go back to my purpose, or maybe even find my purpose for the next chapter. But it's definitely, identity is definitely something which is evolving, and not just because of job loss or the decision to change careers, but actually as we mature in our lives, our value systems are changing, and life happens. So the best thing we can do is adapt and go with the flow.
Yes. And I've seen so many people say similar to what you just mentioned, that, this wasn't the plan, but it was the turning point I almost didn't know I needed.
Yeah.
When you speak about identity, do you want to share a bit more about the length of time you were at McKinsey? And then do you think, because you were there for a number of years, do you think your identity evolved throughout that period of time?
Yes, that's for sure. So I spent 13 years at McKinsey, which is significant, right? Not, and any company and any profession. And I started there when I was, mid-20s, I would say. And my priorities were completely different. I was like super eager, very hungry. I wanted to learn experience, and just like get everything which came with the job. And I was traveling a lot and building my career, and it was really fantastic time, and I had exposure to many different people, and all sorts of tasks and responsibilities. But as I got older and older, something else grew in me, and I guess this is also part of how my identity evolved and how my value systems shifted. So I actually wanted to spend more time at home. I wanted to spend more time with my family. And right now, it's been 6 years that I 6 years, 5 years since I left McKinsey, and I'm in a very different place right now. Living in California instead of Eastern Europe, there is a cultural shock. And what I also noticed and realized for myself, that flexibility is something which I value extremely right now, which in the past was not really important for me because I was so dedicated to my job that everything else was like, put in the second, third, fifth priority.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, like, how I can spend my time is extremely important.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I also had a similar experience, which is how Greta and I met and bonded a number of months ago. For me personally, I had a corporate career for 20 years. A long stint of that, almost 12 years, was with Google, a mix of in Europe and here in California. And I thoroughly enjoyed my job when I started there. It was fast paced. I was learning a lot. I was in the office a lot of hours, but it was very motivating. And I was around lots of very smart people, and Google are always working on innovative things.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting. But, once I hit like 10, 11 years, I was getting older. My priorities were also changing. And while I looked very successful on paper, good
Yeah.
job, good title, earning good money, also traveling the world, got the opportunity to relocate to California. I also realized that, I had stopped enjoying the environment,
Hmm.
and work actually felt like it was more draining my cup than filling it up.
Yeah.
And for me, I had this constant tension for probably 12 to 18 months before I decided, okay, this is the sign, this environment isn't for me anymore. I also chose to leave. And then a year ago, started working for myself and set myself up as a coach. But identity was a huge part for me working at Google for so long. It was also where I probably grew up through most of my career. And leaving and figuring out my identity after I worked there was also, something I definitely grappled with for a few months.
Yeah, absolutely. It resonates with me as well. It took me, I would say, 2 years to make a decision. And probably that was the hardest decision in my life, to be honest. And it took some time to adjust and figure out like, okay, so how do I create value in this world without this job, without this title, without everything which comes with the job. So when kicking off this topic and this discussion, you were talking about like how many different emotions and feelings are coming up when unexpected change happens. And for both of us, this example is an example for our decision, and we made this change and still came with so many you know feelings we which we had to deal with. And right now there are so many people who are just given this decision, and they cannot control the circumstances. So I'm just wondering, like, what is your perspective when an unexpected change happened, and you didn't expect to let go on a Monday morning, 6 a.m., just getting an email that you are no longer part of the job. So what could help to navigate such situation?
Yes, this actually happened to me earlier in my career. I relocated from the UK to Ireland for a job, gave up my job in London, and I was ready to make the move back to Ireland. And I had literally been in my job less than 2 months.
Oh,
And I went into the office one morning. There was a lot of closed doors and people whispering, and I thought something doesn't feel right. And within an hour, my boss called me into the office and said the head office of the company had decided to completely close down the Dublin office and everybody was being let go.
wow.
And of course, I was in shock. It was 8:30 in the morning. I had just gotten into the office. And I also said to my manager, but I just started here like 2 months ago. How could you not have known this was coming? And they said, we honestly didn't. Our financials have hit a really bad quarter. And this is what the company have decided. So yes, in those weeks afterwards, I think first there is the shock of literally just processing what
Yeah.
happened, because you go home and it's 10 a.m. and you're just sitting there going, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And I think you think of a number of things. You think, okay, how will I tell my friends and family? Does this reflect badly on me? And I think that's the first few days you're kind of consumed with that, at least for me personally. And then it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? What's the forward plan? And I think the company I ironically had moved across to Ireland for, it was an interesting role, but it probably wasn't in the industry that I would have personally chosen. It was in like the food manufacturing industry. And I thought at the time, this job is fine for now and for a few years, and it will get me back to Ireland. But when I realized I had to find a new job, I was like, you know what? I always wanted to work in tech. I'm here in Dublin. There's so many tech companies here. And I started looking for a job in tech. And ironically, be this is when I started at Google. And I
Hmm.
probably wouldn't have found that job if I hadn't been let go and was available at short notice and in the right place at the right time. And so I think being adaptable Although it's easy
Mm.
to say being adaptable, just being open to new opportunities, even if they weren't originally what you thought might come up. Um, Comfort in knowing that it's less about you, even though our mind often wants to go
Yeah.
there, and not letting us affect our self-esteem and our self-confidence too much. And then after we've had that healing time, I think it is very much about figuring out, okay, what's the ideal role, the ideal environment, the ideal type of work I want to be doing, and kind of almost like pivoting in that direction and going after it and seeing what opportunities come up.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. This is such an amazing example, and you know, there was so much wisdom, which you were saying, and what sits with me quite a bit is like how to see opportunity in a situation which doesn't seem as an opportunity at first.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I agree with you that processing is an extremely important part, and asking help from others during those times. That's definitely something which I would also highlight. But probably the hardest part is like how to shift perspective, and in a given situation, just like see the positive and try to leverage it to your advantage,
Mm-hmm.
and really like just like look around. Okay, I have this skill set and experience, no matter how little or how long, and and take it as a stepping stone and as a foundation, and don't think like, okay, now I need to start from scratch. I built a career and now I'm at square zero. It's not true. So you have so much knowledge and experience on which you can build on the next chapter. And the next chapter might be in a completely different industry, environment, or culture, but like going back to the fundamentals and your values, your strengths could actually help you like see much more opportunities than what presents itself at first.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And I think, when I joined the workforce in my 20s and into my 30s, the kind of psychological contract with the company was you work hard, dedicate yourself to the company, and ultimately they will look after you. You'll be well paid, have interesting work, etc. That's at least my experience in the tech industry, which is most of my experience. And then, over time in the most recent years, I think that psychological contract has changed and it's much more shifting to the US system of employment at will. And while historically, if you had one good job, that was great. But now I think people are shifting away from, the expression putting all their eggs in one basket. And
Yeah.
people are starting to look at like portfolio work is one way of calling it, or gig work. So maybe doing something on the side yourself, maybe doing some contract work, maybe freelancing, or a combination of some of those. And I think that spreads out the risk going forward, that even if one thing is not going well, then maybe another part is. And I see a lot of people are moving in this direction going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something which is fascinating me in California. So I met so many people who are just like doing multiple things at the same time, and it's extremely inspiring. But again, I emphasize the identity part, because it it's again an adjustment. So for me, like having the corporate background and working for tech startups, and now I consider myself an entrepreneur. So what does it even mean? What is the definition? And what is success means for me right now? And obviously going after clients and working on different projects, it's a completely different way of life, and it's not for everybody. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's a great option to have like multiple streams of income, but first I would definitely recommend to reflect if this is for you, if this is matching your personality or not. And you know, maybe I couldn't be an entrepreneur like 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago, but in my current environment and my current life situation, this is something which I enjoy and I see a lot of opportunities in there. But again, like reflecting on what's important to you specifically and tailor your solution to yourself, that's extremely important. So I don't think that when unexpected change happens, like copy paste solutions can work. So and this is the time when asking help could be extremely valuable. So asking help from your mentors, asking from, you know, maybe there are people who can advise you, you know, going to a coach, of course, but just don't sit by yourself and try to figure out on your own, because there might be a perspective you are just not seeing, and like bringing that richness into your thought process could actually expand and you know, make your choices for the next step very different.
Mm-hmm. And I would actually double down on one of the things you said there about, asking for help. I actually would say, like, it's a must to lean into your network, to
Yeah.
reconnect with people that maybe you haven't spoken to for a long time, to do virtual coffee chats, real life coffee chats, depending on where you're going, and just learning about maybe how the market works, especially if you've been in one company for maybe a number of years. My learning was when you're in one company for a number of years, you're a bit removed from the
Yeah.
marketplace, what's happening, how other companies are hiring, and the reality of being close to looking for a job. And so things change. And I would say when you're back on the job market, definitely reconnecting with people across all spectrums, people who are in the workforce, people who are also looking, or maybe people who are out of work for some time and have gotten into a job and maybe they have some insights they could share. Because as I mentioned, things are changing all the time. And especially with AI, the way companies are hiring, some companies are even using AI now to do a first round interview, which was,
Yeah.
you know, a crazy thought 15 years ago when we thought that might actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, just again emphasizing the message on networking and gathering information. And you know, this hits home for me quite a bit because when I moved to California, I really like I didn't really had a network here. I didn't know many people, and the people who I knew didn't have connections in California. So the ones who were willing to make introductions actually couldn't. So I found myself in a situation when I realized I just really need to put myself out there. And the first step was like figure out what out there means for me. And you
Yes.
know, I started to go to different networking events, women's circles, co-working spaces. I went to a certain like talk series when you know topics were resonating with me, because that's already a filter. So the people who go there probably like, you know, in the same field or share the same values that you are. So I started to do that quite aggressively. And at some point, you know, I said like, okay, I'm burnt out of networking because I was doing it so much. But I had to realize that if I don't show up, nobody will knock on my door and you know, offer me anything basically. And you know, it's important for the story that I was applying to jobs like crazy. So it's a full-time job, and
Mm-hmm.
I was doing everything I could, and I was very disappointed because the results didn't came as I expected them to come. So I had to find other ways and alternative solutions. So I just, you know, pushed it as much as I could, and eventually I you know, I landed myself a job, and I found out that, you know, coaching is something which is close to my heart, and I always wanted to support people, and I always did that throughout my job. So it was kind of like an evolution
Hmm.
But for sure, I had to persevere, and I had to show a lot of resilience throughout this period.
That's what I was going to ask you. To use your own words, you were job hunting like crazy and you weren't being that successful at the time. Looking back now, what would you say are some of the ways or some of the things that helped you like keep your motivation up or helped you like just keep going?
You know, it's a family thing. It's in my DNA that never give up. That's something which is just, tattooed to my heart or into my heart. But honestly, I always tell myself that, I'm capable, I have a lot of experience, and I have a lot of value to offer. So for me, accepting failure in this way was not an option.
Hmm.
And it was very hard. So there were days like, I just cannot sit again in front of LinkedIn and, research companies and adjusting my resume and push. But that's what it takes. You have no choice. And I think that the job market is very tough in the US. I didn't think that it's gonna be this tough, but it is.
Hmm.
So yeah, you have to push it. There is no other option.
Yes,
Especially, I would add, especially so for someone like me who didn't have a network. So if you went to school in the US and if you already have work experience in the US, I'm not saying it's easy. Maybe it's slightly easier. And if
mm,
that's the case, I would just emphasize the power of leveraging your network. I
yeah.
think that's key.
And I know for a lot of people, when we say the word networking, people have a visceral reaction. They're like, "Oh, I hate networking. I don't like going. I don't like putting myself out there." And I would say I would describe myself as an introvert. So I too can only do maximum of 1 to 2 networking events in a week, and I am forcing myself. But what I found workable was if I go to events where the schedule is quite structured. So let's say
Yeah.
there's a talk in the middle, and it's not just 2 hours of trying to make conversation with people that you don't know, which can feel very, very long for anyone who finds that difficult or a little bit daunting. So I find, yes, if I go 15 minutes before the talk starts, do 15 minutes of networking, join the talk. And I think to your point, you usually meet people there who are interested in the same, whether it's industry or specialism, etc. And then I think it's not putting so much pressure on yourself that you have to meet 10 people or you have to find a job tonight. I think it's making like 1 or 2 meaningful connections.
Yeah.
And then that's a good night of networking and being comfortable with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you that it's more about depth and the curated experience. So I'm very similar to you. So there were some situations when I'm like, I just cannot go to another networking event. So you have to understand your own boundaries and energy level, which you were also talking about.
Hmm.
So and really like finding the people who you genuinely connect with. And for me it's also hard to go to these events and within just like no time, what is your title, what you are building, what you are good at, what is your value proposition, and
Hmm.
and it's also, again, it's a question of a personality. So some folks are extremely good at that, and they have this like perfect sentence about themselves. I was not one of those, so I'm still adjusting like how am I introducing myself. But finding your circle, your people, it's very critical and helpful, because then it's gonna give you also confidence. And maybe one more thing I would say, for me it was very hard at the beginning, to say that I'm new to this. I'm new to this country. I'm new to this state, and I'm after 15 plus years of experience, I'm again looking for a job. So it was maybe even embarrassing, and so I had to overcome this mindset. and say like, okay, they might be in the same situation, or they have been in this situation. So why do I think that I'm special and alone in this situation? So I started to actually embrace the fact that I'm new to this state and the city, and actually started to be open about like, yes, I'm looking for new connections and I need help. And it became much easier than it was before. So as always, it's about the mindset and how you want to look at it. So the situation is always as is, right? So it depends on what is your perspective. You can see it as a problem, or you can find opportunities in there, and that's a game changer.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think hopefully your recent experience of having gone through all of this will hopefully be useful for our viewers and people watching this video today.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So, in closing, I would say, I know we've been talking maybe for 30 or 35 minutes. I wasn't
Wow.
actually keeping track. But I would say to those of you watching, if you're in the middle of an unexpected change, firstly, I think we empathize, and hopefully that comes
Yeah.
across today. And I would say, know that at a big picture level, at least in the world, the way of working is dramatically changing. And so it's not about you, your performance, your skills. And I appreciate that sometimes where our minds can go and try and tell us that that was the reason. And I also think, as we mentioned, the days of working hard for one company and almost selling your soul are gone. And sadly, that now there's just a lot to process and get used to if you've been let go and you find yourself on the job market, or at least figuring out like what's your next step, what's your next direction. And we talked about, adaptability and resilience. And I do think those two things come rise to the surface during those times. And I think leaning on friends, family, networks as well. Greta, would you have any closing words today?
Yeah, just one. Actually, you summarized it extremely nicely. Uh, I guess for me, the last point would be and connect to yourself. So give yourself time and also grace. And we didn't really talk about like purpose and what really motivates you. But during this time, it's definitely an opportunity to turn inwards and just like take stock of like, okay, so what I want to do, and what is this situation helping me to see, and going back to your values and your purpose is always a good start, and you can take it from there anytime change hits you.
Thank you, Greta. So if today's conversation has surfaced questions for anybody watching today, feel free to reach out to Greta or myself. We're always happy to help people think through their next step or just have an informal conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Claire.